Perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. It's a great opportunity to get in front of a new audience and talk about some really great research that has been going on between ourselves, J.D. Power, and Miller Canfield. This is in conjunction with an M-City project. So M-City, as you know, is very focused on connected and automated vehicle technology research. And they had come forward to Miller Canfield with a question. With the automated vehicles, what is that going to do to the liability process? And they actually had this question phrased to multiple law firms, and they all had essentially about a year or so to go through and do a research project and come back with their theories on how they thought the ecosystem was going to be impacted by such technology. And Miller Canfield reached out to us at J.D. Power and said, we want to take this from really this theoretical discussion and get more data specific to consumers, data specific to litigators. And so that's how we came to be a part of this project. So Tina was unable to be here today. She certainly sends her regrets, but I will present the project in its full entirety. I do have copies of our white paper. That is the material that we'll be presenting today over where I'm sitting. So certainly if you would like a copy, either hard copy or digital, both are available to everyone here today. So let's talk about the project itself and how it was conducted. So with the concept of we wanted to take it out of this theoretical realm and really take it to a data-driven research, the project was conducted in two parts. One part was where we reached out to 1,500 consumers across the United States and essentially asked them their thoughts and opinions regarding several different matters regarding automated vehicles. So it ranged everywhere from the basic, would you be willing to ride in a vehicle, all the way to if your automated vehicle got into an accident, how would you want to resolve that situation? And we walked our way through various levels of automation to see where distinctions and differences might occur with those consumers. The second part of the project was looking at contacting the top legal practitioners across the United States. So this was both plaintiff lawyers as well as defense lawyers. We wanted to understand both sides of the fence and what they thought automated vehicle technology would essentially do to their process of litigating, right? So this ranged everywhere from gaining experts, gathering knowledge, contacting the company, length, duration, process, et cetera. And we wanted to see where their thoughts were similar and where their thoughts certainly were different on both sides as well. So I'll present some of the surface level results today, and again, the deeper results are available to you in its full context. So it seems like we can't get, even into this automated driving conversation without the topic of trust coming up. And there certainly is this chicken and egg type of scenario. When we look at, and when I say we, I'm talking a bit about our J.D. Power specific research with consumer experiences. And we have a great amount of research with consumer experiences with their vehicles today. And their vehicles today are essentially in that level 1 type of experience with these ADAS systems. Some are starting to get towards that level 2, but really it's this level 1. And so when you think about these technologies, blind spot, forward collision warning, adaptive cruise, many of these are in this very highly satisfying type of experience. Highly satisfying, consumers want it again, they like the experience that they're getting with these technologies. But when we take that versus that leap to a fully automated vehicle, that's where we start to see consumers really pulling back and having some more concerns. And so this element of trust is what we're finding to be ultimately central to automated vehicle development. And it's central now, and we anticipate this is going to be central for quite a period of time. And it starts with consumer interest. Thinking about the consumer interest in automated driving, we see almost a one-to-one correlation between the consumer's level of trust in the technology versus their level of interest in, willingness to ride, interest in purchasing it, et cetera, going down the road, but it always comes back to the level of trust first. So we have to conquer this element before we can even begin to talk about conquering, the element of would you consider purchasing or even riding in one. But really this trust framework, it goes beyond the consumer. You can see that this is really a broader ecosystem as well. This is where the liability process comes in and what consumers are looking for out of this liability process to be able to trust automated vehicles in its entirety. They want this just, transparent process for liability. It includes the government, insurance, and providing essentially assurance that these products are safe, right, qualified by a third party. But all of this framework really is a conversation that, again, is going to determine this trajectory of automated technology incorporation and adoption by consumers. We can't get off the ground if the consumers don't have that level of trust. So looking at some of these, kind of starting points from the consumer point of view, the skepticism is high for automated driving, and it's been high for a number of years. So at this point in time, this research here was conducted almost exactly a year ago. So we were in field with this research in September of 2017 last year. And at that point in time, the consumers were about split for a willingness to ride. And we wanted to take ownership off the table, so anything, any of those cost prohibitors that might be holding consumers back, this was just strictly willingness to ride in an automated vehicle. And we see it's a near 50-50 split between those that have a positive sentiment and those that don't. For those that had a positive sentiment, you can see this level of excitement, curiosity, and hope for what this technology can bring, and certainly the opportunities that it can possess. However, when you read we had several verbatim opportunities for consumers to really expand upon their thoughts and reasons. When you read those verbatims for those people that had that positive response, it was very conditional, very much this if then if type of situation. If the vehicle is safe, then I would ride in it. But it really had this qualifying element as an underlying tone. For those people that were in that negative sentiment that probably or definitely would not be willing to ride, there was this element of a dread risk. Fear of being out of control, fear of what happens if the vehicle gets into an accident. And so these are elements that we have to recognize are, in some cases reality, and in some cases we know that as an industry we've got safety factors and multiple redundancies and elements built into the systems that the consumer isn't necessarily aware of our progression for that technology feasibility at this point in time. So progressing the question and focusing, strictly on those people that had that negative sentiment, I probably or definitely would not be willing to ride in this technology, in this automated vehicle. We only asked the question of them to say, we wanted to see what levers might work. And one of the levers that we were testing was, if the vehicle was essentially backed by the government, if it met all safety standards, right? And obviously we don't have those safety standards in place, but we're trying to create this hypothetical of would this make a difference? You can see there was a portion of people that started to move up that curve, right? They had that negative sentiment and they were starting to move. So this does look like it could be one, certainly of many potential levers to help influence consumers. One of the other elements that we have to be very aware of is just the public messaging around automated vehicles. And this goes anywhere from media, our company's press releases. It's really quite inclusive of anything that really goes out about this technology. Certainly I brought up one particular example that when this Navia shuttle that was launched in Las Vegas late last year, day one of its operation, it gets into an accident. So, being, certainly very in tune to the subject, it was really interesting to read the headlines. and understand the tone that was coming across through that headline messaging. It really, for the majority of those articles, it wasn't until you were 3/4 of the way through the article before you realized that the automated vehicle did not cause the accident. Everyone was fine. The automated vehicle actually acted appropriately, and it was the other driver's fault, right? But the headlines itself were really posed back to the negative aspect of automated vehicle gets in a crash on day one, right? Kind of the world's going to end for this type of technology, didn't you know? So this messaging is really critical for setting up consumer expectations and playing on potentially these fears and or building up trust in this technology. So one of the challenges that we at JD Power keep talking about is what can we do to talk about the good things that are happening with this technology, talk about the elements, you know, the near misses that were avoided because of this technology, those accidents avoided, et cetera. And you know, certainly it's not as sexy of a headline, but I mean, these are the elements that it's real. This is exactly what's happening, but we have to make sure that we're talking about both sides of the fence with the consumers. So we looked at, and we've been looking at this topic of, you know, what is your largest concern with automated vehicles and what is the largest benefit? So let's start with the concern. We've been asking this question over a period of time, and we anticipate both of these answers to change, certainly as consumers become more educated, as they start to get experience, you know, look at that, the messaging that we have within the market, et cetera. But one of the elements that has been very consistent both across generations, so this is Generation Z all the way to the pre-boomer generation, as well as, you know, across these two periods of time that I pulled out here for this data today, is that the top of mind concern for consumers is what the fear of possible technology failures or errors, right? So what happens? And this is, again, comes back to that system redundancy that we are very conscious and very deliberately building into our systems, but that type of technical message isn't necessarily coming back to the consumers of what is being done in this fashion. For the largest benefit, this is where we have seen more movement over time, and this is actually going in a really good direction. When we asked this question back in January 2017, you can see majority of people for Gen X, baby boomer, and pre-boomer generation, the majority of those demographics said, I don't see any benefits at all to automated driving, right? So we had quite a hurdle to get over to even convince them, like, why are we talking about this technology? And so that movement did occur between January to September, and we started to see that number decrease. Certainly there still is quite a large portion of people that are in that had that sentiment, but now we're starting to see people recognizing, you know, it allows me to do other things while driving. There is a safety benefit. And certainly this helpful for senior citizens and disabled, that's starting to gain a bit more momentum and traction, and we anticipate that that's going to continue to build over time as well. So continuing on this consumer research trajectory, we were asking consumers, how do you think you're going to learn how to use, you know, how to operate a self-driving vehicle, this fully automated vehicle? And you can see the range in many cases is very traditional, right? My dealer is going to teach me how to do this. I'm going to look at my owner's manual. I'm going to learn how to use it on my own, right? That one, to me personally, as a human factors person, doesn't build my confidence and you know, get to that level of we're going to have 100% success with that type of process. But that's what's on consumers' mind. But there is a large portion, right? I think it's 47% of consumers that say, you know, I would be willing to take a driver's education course on this. So that was definitely encouraging, if you will. We went further into this learning question and said, would you be willing to get a special designation on your driver's license to where you take a course and then you are now qualified to operate an automated vehicle? And there was actually quite a large willingness. 62% were in that positive camp of I would be willing to take that training and had that special designation on my license. Now, granted, you know, as a researcher, it's really great to say, wouldn't this be great to have this? Obviously, large hurdles to overcome from a DMV and incorporating this type of project. However, what this recognizes is that this can allow us to create this minimum standard of knowledge for how to operate these vehicles. I mean, one thing is certain, I've seen with the diversity of names, how these functions and features are working with these lower levels of technology, there is not standardization out there. I mean, it's extremely diverse walking into a Ford product and looking at how their forward collision warning system works versus going over to a Chrysler product versus a Mercedes product. They're all called something different, labeled different, icons, warnings, how it functions, speed it operates at, right? No consistency. So what can we do to essentially elevate this consumer understandability about how these systems work on a generic level? And then certainly, how does your role as a driver change, right? And that capability of the vehicle. Because right now, in some cases we think about automated vehicles going to a level 5, but there are going to be some steps in between as well that are very critical to us to be able to make sure that we're explaining to the consumer. So now let's transfer into more of this dispute resolution. So if your vehicle was in an accident, now what happens? So we asked the consumer for a level 0 vehicle, a level 3 vehicle, so that transfer of control, and then a level 5 fully automated vehicle where there's essentially no driver interaction is how we had phrased it very simply to the consumer. And started out with this one, would you litigate in this situation if your vehicle got into an accident? Now, each of those levels were counterbalanced, et cetera, through the study to make sure that we didn't have any bias. But what we were seeing as a result was, as the levels of automation increased, we were seeing more clarity. Level 0 and level 3, roughly half the population were in that, I don't know if I would litigate. I think I'm going to let my insurance most likely take care of it. When we got to a level 5 technology, that's where consumers were, I think it was 51% said, yes, I'm going to litigate. Because they started to see this clarity, right? A level 5, they're removed. They're no longer a driver. They refer to themselves as a passenger in this case because the vehicle has the full capability of driving. One of the other elements that's coming out with an increase in level of automation is the emotional state and the desire to bring public awareness to such an incident. And much of that is rooted in, we see this growing trend where consumers are viewing a fully automated vehicle that it will have 0 accidents. So this, to me, was a huge insight of how, where did this message come that an automated vehicle will be 0 accidents? And looking at this, certainly we have many company missions that are out there, kind of this mission 0, vision 0, kind of, this is our target of what we're getting to. And whether that's the start or whether it's some of our other messaging, but in some way, these consumers have an expectation that there will be 0 accidents. And so this was bringing up, quite an emotional state from several of these consumers, talking about, I would litigate because it's supposed to be a safe vehicle. There was a serious injury. I want to know why it happened and prevent it from happening again, right? So these consumers are thinking, wow, this was really a fluke. I want to make sure that the company takes care of it, that they're well aware, and it never happens again. So that was one. I mean, this last quotation on here was really powerful to me. I would be mad and horrified and would want to make a spectacle of this case. I mean, this person was just appalled that a fully automated vehicle would even get into an accident. So again, are we level setting these consumer expectations appropriately?
Would it be okay for a question?
Yes.
From an automotive company's point of view, at least everyone you're working with right now, you don't need to name them, is there a point of view that safety would be equal to vehicles today or better, in fact?
Well,
just from their point of view, what are they thinking as opposed to what the consumers think?
the motivation from the manufacturers is consistently that this technology should make vehicles safer. So safer versus 0 accidents, that's the gap. This is the expectation of where I think we've got to make sure that we're having that appropriate level setting. To me, it seems that there's a very common pathway towards this is intended to be safer. That's why we're, investing in this technology, and that's the end goal.
Yeah, and from a consumer point of
Yeah, absolutely.
That's actually the gap.
Well, and part of it comes down to what are we calling these technologies, and and setting up some of those potential analogies, if you will. So I'm going to continue on with the presentation just real briefly, and then if we have time, because I want to make sure I'm not messing up the whole. Do we? Okay. Okay, and then we'll come back to it. I'm just going to keep going, and then we'll come back to questions in a moment. So on this pathway for consumers, the data that the vehicle contains with the sensors and cameras, it's extremely rich, right? You are all well aware of the wealth of knowledge that this vehicle contains. And we wanted to understand from a consumer point of view, would they be willing to share that data if the vehicle was in an accident? And we see a very high proportion of people that said, yes, I would be willing to share. And this is encouraging. And again, this was framed as after an accident, would you be willing to share this information? And the theme and motivation was really helping for the greater good. Again, back rooted to that. I didn't think an accident was going to occur, so let me share this so it doesn't happen again. For those that are in that negative side, that probably or definitely would not, more privacy concerns, elements there that they wanted a bit more assurance, certainly of how that data was going to be managed and secured. So shifting over to the legal practitioner's voice just for a brief moment and summing up, what we saw that was very common across the plaintiff and the defense side is, first and foremost, with automated driving, they both agree cost to litigate is absolutely going to increase and quite dramatically. Many of them referenced, and part of the theory when we had started this project was looking back at the Toyota sudden acceleration case and the cost and expense to litigate that issue, and it was strictly just, I'm kind of minimizing it here, but it was only an acceleration portion. Now we're talking about full vehicle control, right? So you can imagine the hockey stick of software and components and et cetera that are going to be really investigated through this litigation process. Both sides also agree that the opportunity for legal claims to be resolved in an out-of-court alternative dispute resolution is a viable option, right? So they see willingness to be able to start shifting the scales, if you will, to other options that are there. And then finally, they are in agreement with the consumers, essentially, that the richness of this crash data is absolutely going to be very valuable and would accelerate the resolution of these cases. One of the elements that was consistent across both sides was there really wasn't much of a mention of the vehicles that went through this shared control, so this level 3. In the practitioner's mind, they were either talking about a lower level automation that's on the road today or a fully automated vehicle. And the complexity of the shared control and who's in control at what point of time, and did you transfer over control at the appropriate time that I gave you, and how did the vehicle behave, that really was glossed over at this point. So this is what we see as a gap at this point in time going forward. But the opportunity is absolutely, we see the opportunity to create this framework for an alternative dispute resolution model, and one that, between manufacturers and consumers creates this transparency and equity. This is what consumers are really loud and clear on their voice, what they're looking for. And so let's talk about kind of the meat of this matter just here for a moment. So with the alternative dispute resolution options, this question was phrased only to that portion of respondents that said that they would litigate, right? So they were already in the framework of I would litigate based on this level of vehicle and then the accident included. And now we took them through a series of exercises of each of those levels of vehicles, and we also separated it out by the injury severity. So if it was a non-life-threatening injury, no hospitalization required, and on the other side of the fence there was a death or serious injury involved, injury that would include hospitalization. And what we saw was really there was a consistency in the point of view and what the consumers were preferring for dispute resolution across the levels within the injury type. It was really the injury type itself that became the distinguishing factor for these consumers. And when you look at, the full spectrum of injuries that are, a possibility when you get into a crash, the sweet spot is really in this alternative dispute resolution where the claim is resolved out of court, private proceeding, one-time lump sum settlement, that 4 to 12 month range. And that sweet spot, really was the opportune between both injury types, but this provided the consumer something that they felt was a balance of their time, personal investment, as well as compensation that came out of that type of situation. So that was the key conclusion with them. So with that, I will, I know I'm just at time. I really appreciate your time. I will take a couple questions, and you keep me on time, Earl, but again, the full data and report is in this if you would like to have a copy today, so.
Actually, I had a question.
Yes.
And was it looked at whether the insurance costs would go up using a system like this, and would that have affected people's opinions on whether they would use it?
In this research here in particular, we did not look at insurance costs. At J.D. Power, we've been looking at insurance and consumer reaction. And so they are anticipating that there is going to be a bit of a up and down with insurance, right? In some cases, it may go up, but in some cases, it's intended to be safer, so it should also go down. So there's a bit of mixed reaction at this point in time.
So my question is, in your conversations with the public, did you discuss an option that in the future, particularly level 5 comes in, we may not even own vehicles. They could be just, mobility services provided to us, and we can just subscribe to them. So the whole litigation process would not be that, it's me versus somebody else on my car versus somebody else's car.
Mm-hmm. We're trying to keep the ownership out of this study, recognizing that, at this time that this research was being conducted, there seemed to be a shift towards this. Automated vehicles might be more of this transportation as a service, more commercially owned. So that we were intentional in trying to keep that out. We didn't go down that pathway of you don't own it. It was just strictly if you were riding in this vehicle and got into an accident. So we were trying to be a bit more neutral in that point.
I have two related questions. The first is, I think that when everybody is thinking of an ADS vehicle is thinking of an electric vehicle. So the question is, do you think that this is the perception of the consumers, that everybody is thinking that the electric ADS vehicle should be an electric vehicle? And the question is, if this is the case, are there any studies, because maybe it could help, telling that how electric vehicles compare in safety with gas vehicles?
So we have not seen a consumer point of view where they personally are linking automated vehicles to electric, right? This is strictly within our industry circles themselves. Consumers are not creating that connection at this point in time.
Sorry, this would be helpful if ADS vehicles are electric vehicles? Because in my opinion, I don't know, they are safer.
Lots to debate on that one, certainly from an impact worthiness perspective and other risks that are involved with the battery versus combustion engine, right? So many pros and cons that we can talk about.
Thanks, Kristin. Really, I actually was surprised at how interesting this was. So
Thank you. I'll take that. Thank you.
So I was surprised, a couple of things. The one thing I was surprised by was the fact that it looked like almost zero interest in the sort of senior citizen assisted driving situation, which in my mind, I have elderly parents, I'm thinking, God, I wish I had an assisted driving capability to put my folks into because they're dangerous, or, to themselves or others. So that surprises me, and it leads me to the question of why isn't there, I'm hoping you can do a follow-up that really explores the level 3 situation a lot more in depth, because, for example, you have a slide that says sharing data. We would certainly, most of the cases they said they would share, but if you're in an assisted driving situation,
Right.
all of a sudden you're creating a huge personal liability by sharing data about how crappy you are as a driver. So I'm just wondering if you have plans to extend this in this area, because that seems to be the go-to-market approach for a self-driving car as opposed to a fully level 5 situation.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly there are some manufacturers that are going through that step system and others that are skipping some levels. So we are continuing this type of research and continuing to progress this information. So completely agree. I mean, this really opened up the doors of like, what else do we want to know, and continue on these types of learning. So that is one. The other element about the senior citizens and helpful, for that age driver, part of that is really coming back to the demographic in its entirety, that the older demographics, they are the least trusting and least interested in this technology. So, I mean, the majority are still on that realm of, I don't see any benefits. So they haven't been convinced about why we're talking about this technology and seeing the opportunities. This is where this experience, that chicken and egg, really starts to come in, right? We're part of one of MCity's shuttle, the driverless shuttle that they have incorporated on campus. That's a level 4 technology, and we're seeing some riders come on there and hearing their conversation before getting on that shuttle versus after that shuttle ride. Now, granted, it's riding at 12 miles an hour on a pre-designated route, but it really was one of those situations like, hey, that was not so bad. I actually kind of liked it. So this is that chicken and egg, trust, experience, and start to continue this flywheel process that then people are going to connect the dots that we see as the potential, but we really need it to transfer to the consumers to realize that full potential, right? If they're not seeing what we're seeing, then it's not going to go anywhere. Great, thank you.
I had a question. Do you have data on how the insurance companies are reacting? So, for example, are they assuming that the car is always not at fault and so your insurance rates are going to go down? Or are they assuming that it's up in the air on any accident and everyone's going to have to be investigated?
We're actually starting, we did an initial research earlier this summer, and we've got some more continuing research with insurance companies and the consumer point of view. So this is going to be more stories that we'll have coming out quite shortly on that type of data, but it's really, thinking about this ecosystem, I mean, that insurance side is a really powerful side of the house, both on, what is the insurance company thinking of themselves, and then what is the consumer thinking, and a manufacturer, and all of these transportation companies as well. Yeah.
The question I have is really the level of awareness about what's actually level 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm sure in your work you sort of gave an example,
right,
definition, but sort of the technical complexity under that. So that's first. So people are reacting to something that they may not understand the technical risks underneath that. So that's the first question. The second question is around litigation, which these alternative dispute resolution concepts. And when you think about things like, going back, things like Superfund and environmental disasters, until something happens that's catastrophic, you have no idea what could happen as far as class action suits and things. So you're pre-asking people questions before they have any notion of what could happen in terms of like software, compromising software through hacking and things like that, where you have like sort of scale disasters. So, I mean, are people even, do you have open-ended where people could sort of qualify their perspectives?
We do.
I'm just kind of curious about that.
We do. So let me take your first question first. The levels of automation, there is huge confusion over them. Let me be the first to say, even when we're talking in a room of experts that are in this field, if I was to ask you, this Super Cruise system, which level would you define it as? And this ProPilot system from Nissan, what level would you define it? We are not going to find agreement amongst ourselves. And so this creates a level of confusion that we absolutely have to deal with as an industry to make sure that we're not talking past each other, right? And especially to consumers. So that's step one. Asking these questions of consumers before they've had this experience, there is risk, right? But this helps us to understand where is their point of view at this point in time, and then as we become more educated and more of these vehicles come out on the road, now how is that changing, right? Are we moving in that right direction of level of understandability as we've had more vehicle accidents, certainly like the Uber accident in Arizona had happened right the week that we had published this white paper, right? And thinking how does that type of incident impact people's thoughts and views and how they would deal with the situation. We're going to be in a very volatile situation for the next period of time, certainly.
I have a question. So we've had a recent incident where pollution data from automobiles were manipulated. So in the ADR process, how does one verify that the information provided by the onboard computers or the remote computers is correct?
This is a great example of trust, right? You know, where this ecosystem for automated vehicles is going to keep coming back to trust. Prime example.
But somebody's got to verify it.
Somebody's got to verify.
It goes to a legal process.
Exactly. So there's this, you know, consumers are seeing assurances coming from a third-party source who can qualify, who can essentially put something out there. That's where we're seeing the consumer, you know, gaining comfort coming from that type of source.
So while we're on the subject of trust, have you seen any thought to fleshing out the ecosystem of the cybersecurity aspect of this? Not only on board, but also the remote compute that's going on and the smart city infrastructure that the vehicle is going to be operating in?
Certainly. I mean, going back to the level of concern, like that greatest level of concern for consumers, the top was possible technology failure or error. The second, and consistent across those generations, was the possibility for the technology to be hacked, right? So this is quickly becoming that second concern. So we've I know that there are active projects, collaborations, consortiums focused on that subject. I'm not deeply involved to understand where they are on that progression of solutions at this point, but I know that, you know, to me, we're in that right direction.
Over here, Rich from insideHPC. Question, when comparing this to the airline industry, okay, Airbuses have been flying themselves, except for takeoff and landing, for 20 years. Was no one concerned about the hundreds of millions of dollars of each plane and the lives and stuff? It seems like there's precedent here, is my point, and I'd like to get your comment.
Yeah, there is precedent. We have an opportunity to learn from other industries, even thinking about the automated technology development that's going on in construction equipment and agricultural, and they've made huge progressions. I mean, we as an automotive industry have an opportunity to learn from all of these and really jumpstart, right? There's no need to reinvent the wheel. So some of this comes into transferring that training, that consumer education, incorporation, what happens if something, you know, if a crash does occur, we have an opportunity to learn from each other.